Welcome to Under the Lens. Come and enjoy an extraordinary, raw, and unfiltered podcast that delivers debate, discussions, and interviews about film, pop culture, and everything in between. Here is your host, film critic and journalist, Byron Lafayette.
Greetings all, Byron Lafayette here, and you are listening to Under the Lens with Byron Lafayette, where we cover entertainment, literature, and everything in between. I like to do interviews, movie reviews, TV reviews, and just chat about everything that interests me and you. So today, Valentine's Day is coming up, and so I decided, it would be fun to do a film that kind of encapsulates, kind of the idea of romance, love, true love, spanning decades, it's just a perfect concept to go over with the holiday coming up. And so today we're going to have a special guest who is going to talk about a film that exists somewhere in time. So pardon the pun, everyone. So today the special guest is going to be Daryn Kirscht, and he is the host of Round 2, the film sequel podcast. He is also the award-winning author of the SNY-Verse Saga, and he is the founder of Oak Valley Media. And he is also a member of the Independent Film Critics of America. So welcome, Daryn, to the program.
Is it you? No, thanks for having me, Byron. I'm so excited to be back on the podcast, and I'm so excited to talk about this movie.
Man, I am really excited as well because this was my first time seeing the film, and so I'm very excited to talk about it. It was not what I expected, and so yeah, there's definitely a lot for us to discuss. So as we get started, what was your experience with this movie somewhere in time? Where did you first see it? How did you hear about it? All that fun stuff.
Well, being towards the latter end of the millennials, I was not alive when this movie came out. My parents were actually still pretty young when this movie came out, but I first watched this movie. It was like right after I graduated high school in 2012 for the first time. I think it was on Netflix at the time, and I remember watching it and I was just speechless. I was just blown away by this movie, and I couldn't tell you why. I don't know why it was, but I was just so blown away. And just, I've always been such a big Christopher Reeve fan. I grew up with the Superman movies. And then of course, as I got older, I've watched some of his other movies, Remains of the Day, Death Trap, a lot of his other films that he has done. So I've always been a big fan of him. And this movie is just, everything about it is just fascinating to me. So I'm super excited. We have a lot to talk about with this episode.
We absolutely do. My experience was, I had never heard of this before. And honestly, I was part of the reason I was so curious was that I had not really seen a Christopher Reeve film outside of Superman. So this was kind of a new experience for me of kind of seeing him in a different role. And I remember you had told me about it. You said, oh, he's in this time travel romance film. And I was super curious when I heard that because I love anything time travel related. I love time travel movies. And I'm also a big fan of romance movies as well. It's I love, Legends of the Fall, Pride and Prejudice, Cairo Time, all of those ones, if there's a romance film, I will watch it. And so, seeing kind of two of those genres that I like mashed together just made it that I had to see this movie. And, we'll touch, on a lot of the themes later on, but yeah, I was impressed with it. And, Christopher Reeve, he's, 90% of the time remembered just for Superman, but, he was a great actor and, he had a lot of range. And so it was really cool seeing him in this very, very different role and seeing him just do really well in it.
Absolutely. And I still say to this day, I'm obviously, if you know me, I'm a big Superman fan, right? So I still, adore his Superman movies, all 4 of them, even Superman 4. Still waiting for that extended cut. But I will say that Somewhere in Time is my favorite Christopher Reeve movie of all time.
Oh, that's awesome to hear, because it's very true. Like I am planning this year, I want to do a Superman marathon, movie, see all of his, and then also Superman Returns. Cause I know sometimes they say that one is technically in the canon with the Reeves film, but also sometimes a spinoff. I haven't seen Superman Returns, so I don't know 100% if it's connected to the Reeves verse or not. Wow. But I'm planning on doing a big watch through of all of those this year. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know what you think. You have to let me know what you think of Superman Returns, because I'm sure you're a big fan of Man of Steel. Yes?
Oh, absolutely. I love it.
So it's like the polar opposite of that movie. So I'll be very curious to see what your thoughts are on that.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that'll be interesting. I'm very curious to see it. Yeah, because like I have some friends who really dislike it, and then like some other ones, there was another guy who he's a huge Man of Steel fan, and he really liked it. That he thought it was good, and so I was like, okay, I'm very curious now to see. Has a lot of great actors in it, so I'm a big Brandon Routh fan. So that'll be fun to talk about. But yeah. So let's jump into a little bit of the film overview and some stats for listeners who may not be familiar. Somewhere in Time was released in 1980. As Darren said, I also was not alive at that time for the release of this. It was directed by, I want to try and pronounce this name right. I want to say Janat Sarwak.
It was a good attempt. I give you props. It's a good attempt. Okay. His name is Janot Swark.
Okay, very good. So, oh man, I'm glad that I at least was a little bit close with that.
That's a tough one. That's tough.
It was written by Richard Matheson. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Darren, but I believe wasn't he the author of I Am Legend?
Yes, and he was also the author of the book for this movie. He was known for a lot of. I think he's actually most known for writing science fiction, but it just so happened that and more of the fantasy sci-fi kind of stuff, not like this movie. So this is a very different kind of book that he wrote, which was initially called Bid Time Return, which is based on a line from the Shakespeare play Richard II. So so he's also the author of this book, and he's also obviously known for a lot of other science fiction stuff.
I always appreciate it when the author of the book is also the screenwriter for an adaptation. Sometimes we see that not work out, but overall, I always like to see their input of kind of seeing, when there's changes made and everything, to see how that works. But yeah, and so the film stars, of course, Christopher Reeve, Jane Seymour, Christopher Plummer, and Bill Irwin. Music was composed by John Barry, and the cinematography was by Isidore Mankowski. Just an amazing cast in this film, Darren. Obviously Christopher Reeve, but Jane Seymour, Christopher Plummer. Just like a fantastic trio, to lead this.
Yeah, top to bottom, A+.
Yeah, I'm a huge Christopher Plummer fan, so anything that I see. And what was funny was when I was looking at the cast, I was like, oh man, he's in this too. I was like, man, this is gonna be good, because I don't think Christopher Plummer has ever been in a bad movie. So, sure. So the IMDb synopsis for the film states a Chicago playwright uses self-hypnosis to travel back in time and meet the actress whose vintage portrait hangs in a grand hotel. Now, the tagline for the movie was "Someday in the past, he will find her." It was rated PG with a runtime of 1 hour and 43 minutes. Its box office was $9.7 million earned worldwide from an estimated $4 million production budget. So even though we'll talk about later how they mentioned that it did underperform at the time, it still appears that it was quite a profitable film, that this was not one of those ones, that was like a washout of, of in the red. So still was profitable, even though it perhaps didn't do as well as they were expecting. Its Rotten Tomatoes score currently stands at 52% for the critic rating and a whopping 88% in the audience rating. So you can see here there was definitely a big divide between the critics and the audience.
A huge divide.
Massive. Yeah. I mean, 52% to 88. I mean, that's pretty amazing. You know, and I can definitely say, even though we'll get to our scores later, you know, that I definitely am in the audience perspective for this rating. Now, there wasn't a critical consensus listed on Rotten Tomatoes, but I did.
Really? Oh, that's really surprising, actually.
I know. I was surprised at that too, because I always like to include that. And I was like, oh, there doesn't appear to be a consensus listed. So I grabbed two notable reviews, one positive, one negative, just to quickly read those review consensus. So starting with the negative, Roger Ebert said, the movie surrounds its love story with such boring mumbo jumbo about time travel that we finally just don't care. So he definitely did not like this movie. However, on the opposite side, we had a positive review from a Variety magazine, which said, a charming, witty, passionate, romantic drama about love transcending space and time. Somewhere in Time is an old-fashioned film in the best sense of that term. So you can see that, you know, even with the critics, there was a little bit of a divide there, you know, especially with these two, you know, two very well-known, one well-known publication, one critic here. And honestly, you know, I always find movies that have a little bit of that critical divide even more fascinating to talk about.
I completely agree. You know, and, you know, for Roger Ebert, I forgive you. Because I am a big Roger Ebert fan. Yeah, you know, I actually just recently read the book about him and Ebert and Siskel called Opposable Thumbs, and it was just fascinating just reading about their backstory, their history, how they, you know, were rivals both in Chicago as film critics, and how they ended up, you know, on their program for years and years, and their relationship with each other. And so, I mean, I've always highly respected Roger Ebert and his work. But yeah, you know, that's just the thing about film criticism. We're not all going to agree on all movies. So it's fascinating to hear. I'm always fascinated to hear why certain people like or don't like a movie, especially if it's different from my perspective, my point of view, with my opinion, you know.
Absolutely agree. Yeah. And, you know, and that is one thing that I really like about Roger Ebert too, is that, you know, I feel like with modern film criticism, sometimes, you know, you see a lot of you know, newer film critics who kind of feel they have to have a certain opinion of film, you know, whether it be like, what are the quote unquote film bro or whatever, that they, I have to like this movie because it's, you know, it's, you know, independent or arty or whatever. And I always appreciated that Roger Ebert, he very much used his opinion, you know, because I remember one review where I believe it was him, that he really liked Speed 2, you know, and pretty much everyone hated that movie, but he had a very positive review for it. And so I always appreciated that he wasn't scared to go against the current, you know, and just list, hey, this is what I think about something, you know, even in, you know, I would say at times when he was wrong, such as with Somewhere in Time.
Yeah, that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, so let's jump into some fun facts about this film that we can talk about, because there was definitely some interesting things. The first one that kind of surprised me when I was doing some research on the movie after I watched it was that the method of time travel described is a real life theory that was created by author J.W. Dunn, that he wrote about in his book An Experiment with Time, that was published in 1927. Were you aware of that, Darren?
Yes, not when I first watched it, but in more recent years, in the last couple of years, yes, I haven't personally read it. I know Experiment with Time is very difficult to come by. It's hard to find because it's been out of print for so long that, you know, it's just one of those things that there's not a lot of copies that are still out there. You know, they're harder to find, right? But yes, I part of the reason I am so fascinated with this movie isn't only Christopher Reeve. You know, I will admit that's a big part of it, but I will say also that, you know, part of the reason why, you know, this movie, you know, sticks with me is the topic of, you know, of time travel, of premonitions, presentiment, that whole topic, that conversation has just always been super fascinating to me. And, for example, just on a personal note, I have actually and this is not so much in the last few years, but dating back to when I was in college, I would actually record all of the dreams that I had every single night. And I did that for years, like over 5 years. And just, taking note of of maybe trying to figure out the why of it, right? It's supposed to be very like symbolic, and it's not meant to be taken literally and all that. And there's a lot of conjecture about the nature of dreams and dream meanings and whatnot. And, it's been a topic I've always been fascinated by. And I also read a book probably 4 or 5 years ago now by Dean Radin called The Power of Premonitions, which also touches on this too. And it also kind of, talks about how, like, for example, one of the things that it documents a lot of people who had dreams before 9/11 happened. And they had that, and they had that actually happen in their dream. And then to hear all these people from all over the world talk about this, it was one of the things that they did. And they, conducted a study where they'd show you an image, one that would be like a calming image. And then they'd show you an image that would be like one that would elicit kind of a like a scared response from you, right? Like a scary picture of sorts. And in the study that they did, and what they found was that the calming one was normal, as you'd expect, but the picture that would be more startling, the people would actually react to it before the image would actually play. And of course, this is all randomized, so they would have no idea, like when, what kind of image would show up, right? And the idea was to see how long the reaction time would be for something like this. And what they concluded was that, with the images that would randomly show up, that would be a scary, startling image, the people would actually react to it before they had to actually see it. Now, how early that was, I can't remember exactly. It's not like it's a minute ahead of time. It's maybe like a few split seconds. But how would you know to react like that before you'd see it? And if it's random, and you also didn't react like that when it was a calm picture. So and sorry, I'm getting way off topic, but it's just something that I've studied a lot. I've taken a lot of notes about. So it's something that's always fascinated me.
No, honestly, the idea of premonition has always fascinated me as well, because, I generally tend to believe, in premonitions, just because you've heard so many true stories. And even, like my parents, my mom has had, like moments where she's had a feeling of something, maybe, don't go to that place today or something. And then, she heard there was like an accident on the way or something, that there's all kinds of, strange stuff like that I definitely have had some experience with in family and friends and everything, that has led me to think, okay, I definitely think there is something to this. I have no idea whatsoever what it could be, but it does seem like it exists in some form.
I agree.
So the next fun fact here was, that the film was considered a box office disappointment in the United States. However, it was a huge hit in Asia. And Somewhere in Time was one of the highest grossing films in 1980 in China, and played in Hong Kong for 18 months. And
crazy.
I was like, man, that's pretty wild. And it just kind of shows of different opinions of different movies all over, that this movie wasn't as well received in the United States, but over in China, they loved it.
And, part of the reason why it wasn't a big hit here in the US, the idea of relevance, right, is that at the time when this movie came out, there was an actor's strike.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So like Jane Seymour and Christopher Reeve have talked about this in the past, where they weren't allowed to promote the movie because, as we have recently seen this past year, when there is an actor's strike, that part of the gig of making a movie is promoting it, and that would be, part of working. So they weren't allowed to promote this movie. So, how are people supposed to know about it, especially in an era before smartphones and the internet, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Especially back in that time period in the 80s, promotion of a film by the stars was a huge, huge method of marketing. And it still is a large It is still a large method now today, but especially back then, going on the late night talk shows, being, on different TV programs, that was very, very important back then, as, we saw with, TV programs and news and everything garnering massive audiences, then way larger than today.
Yeah, Johnny Carson, baby.
Absolutely. I remember, even the Seinfeld finale, I remember, I think that was in the late 90s, and it was watched by 100 million people, in the United States. And, it's like, we don't see anything even close to that now.
Isn't that crazy?
It is wild how fragmented, audience habits have become now with streaming and TV and everything. It's quite an interesting thing to study.
Yeah, and there's just so many different options, and it's, back then there was only a few different options, or what, and if you want to watch TV, there was a handful of channels. If you wanted to see the movie trailer, and we've talked about this topic, on my podcast, in our I think it was the Pirates of the Caribbean episode. If you wanted to see a movie trailer, you went to the previews. Sorry, you would see the previews for it when you go to the movie theater to watch a movie. You'd see the previews of what's coming, and that was a big deal, back then. Now it's all just on YouTube, and it's just, yeah, it's kind of crazy and somewhat unregulated, and it's just kind of, it's getting to the point where it's hard. And you look at this past year, and look how many big box office failures there were. It's just, and I think it's just it's tough. Like, how do you get people to get back into the movie theater? It takes an event like, the Barbie and Oppenheimer thing, when they both came out at the same time, and they both, one made $1 billion, one was a few dollars short of $1 billion. So it's just, it's crazy. But you see a lot of other movies that are big tentpole movies, that like The Flash and like, what was it, The Marvels, and they just fail. They a huge loss for the studio. So it's tough.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, this summer and into the fall was an absolute bloodbath, for most movies. There was only a few that really, really took off. And it's definitely, without Barbie and Oppenheimer, the theaters would have been in a bad way, this summer. But yeah, it's definitely fascinating. So, one thing that I also found interesting here with one fact was that it said that the moment when Richard Collier first sees the portrait of Elise McKenna in the film was also the first time that Christopher Reeve saw the portrait. He didn't want to see the portrait ahead of time, he said, because it would help meet the director's objective of getting a genuine reaction from him when he first sees the portrait as the character Richard. And I didn't know that, when I first saw the film, but I think in retrospect, thinking back, it really did help with his reaction, because it does feel very genuine in that moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. I think it was a great actor choice. I think it was a great creative choice on his part. And I think it worked very, very well in the movie. Absolutely. And it's interesting because he has a theater background, obviously, right? And he went to Juilliard, and he was there with, Robin Williams and Kevin Conroy. So it was just it's crazy. They were all there at the same time, and so you think of his background, and you think like rehearsal and, and stuff like that. And he was just like, no, it needs to be in the moment reaction. And that's just such a cool choice. And I just think he was so smart when it came to that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was, it was definitely the right decision, because especially with how important that moment is, in the film. I mean, that's kind of it's the second main, event that leads into what happens later, Definitely. Another thing that I found interesting too was that actress Jane Seymour suggested John Barry to the director as a candidate to compose the score for the picture. And it said that the director had balked at the idea because he believed that with their tight budget that they couldn't afford John Barry. But because John Barry was a personal friend of Jane Seymour, she was able to ask him if he would come on board, and apparently he loved the project, and so he agreed to do it. And I think the film would not have been as good or as timeless as it was without his score, in my personal opinion.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think it's one of John Barry's best, maybe his best movie score he'd ever done. And it's interesting because, with him, obviously he did this movie for, like you said, for, he agreed to do it because of Jane Seymour's recommendation. When they were going to make this movie, they had a really hard time getting this movie greenlit, actually. There's actually this really, really good behind the scenes documentary. It's like an hour-long featurette documentary that's on the DVD collector's edition that I have. I also have the Blu-ray. Physical media rules, by the way. And, so I have this. They have this. It's called Back to Somewhere in Time, and on there they had talked about like Juno Sork had talked about how yes, there was there was initial interest, but then it kind of got caught up. And it wasn't really like greenlit. And he actually went and was like, hey, he went to Universal, right? And he's like, hey, I did you guys a solid, coming in and saving Jaws 2, making it, the biggest hit of the summer. Can you do this for me, right? Mm-hmm. And can you let me make this movie as like a, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, whatever, however you want to phrase it. And so they did it, but then they cut the budget in half. They cut it to $4 million.
Oh,
so they were making this big period piece movie, and they had, not nearly the amount of money they thought it would take to do this right, to do it the right way. And so a lot of it was, they had to get people on board who had worked for little to, very little money. And that was part of it, is they didn't think they could afford to ask somebody like John Barry to do the score, but, hey, let me see if I can talk to him, let me, stuff like that. And I know you had the whole Christopher Reeve, how his agent kind of laughed at the idea at the idea of him doing this movie for that little money. And when he read the script, he was like, oh yeah, absolutely. And what's funny about that is that when Christopher Reeve chose to make this movie Somewhere in Time, this was in between Superman the movie and Superman 2. Because, at first they were initially shooting both Superman and Superman 2 at the same time with Richard Donner. But then, of course, with everything that happened with that, they stopped Superman 2. They finished the first Superman movie. It was a big hit, but then they fired Donner. And so in between that time period of when Donner was fired from Superman to go for Superman 2, and before Richard Lester came on to start filming and doing his scenes of Superman 2, what happened was Chris Reeve decided to do this movie in between that in that time period. And Cell Kinds actually sued Christopher Reeve for taking this role because it was breaching his contract for filming. It would not let him do Superman 2, which he was contracted for. And so they would have to push back Superman 2. But his opinion was, well, that movie is probably getting pushed back a little bit anyway, so they can, do it Richard Lester's way. And so that's crazy that they actually had to do it in that time. And they did. But right when he got done filming Somewhere in Time, he flew over and started filming Superman 2 the next week. Wow. It was a few days or something. It was right after. So in the beginning of the movie, when you see Christopher Reeve in 1980 in the present at that time, for that movie, he might look a little bigger. It's because he was working up because he had Superman 2 coming out.
That is really funny. Oh, that's really interesting. I love hearing behind the scenes stories like that for films.
I know. Yeah, it's just crazy.
Mm-hmm. And there's also too, two of the last interesting facts about this film here is that apparently a decade after the film came out, there was a fan club created in 1990 called Insight, which stands for the International Network of Somewhere in Time Enthusiasts. And, apparently it has published over 2,500 pages on this film, which has made it one of the most documented films of all time. And they even apparently publish magazines, that they send out to its members, that come out, a couple of times a year, that contain articles and everything. And, I thought that's so fascinating, that we see, fan clubs and fan groups pop up for, films and for TV shows. But to see, one like this that popped up, way back in 1990, you didn't see it near as much back then as we do today.
Yeah, I mean, being, obviously both of us, obviously being well aware of like the Snyder Cut movement,
Mhm.
right? The release of Snyder Cut fandom and how that eventually led to the release of Zack Snyder's Justice League, right? I mean, this was well before, decades before that was even, a thought, right?
Mhm.
So about a Justice League movie, but yeah, I mean, and they don't even call themselves a fandom. I think they go by Appreciation Society. Is how they prefer to be. This is their term, how they prefer to be called. But yeah, I mean, how awesome is that? That they care so much about this movie and the making of the movie and what it means to them, and just how much passion was put into the making of this movie, that it rubs off on on viewers and people who watched it, and all of a sudden now you have this international network of enthusiasts for the movie, right? To honor the film and yeah, and so they get together every year, and I think in the fall, usually like September or October, they get together and they have a big weekend celebrating it. People from the cast and crew who are still alive will sometimes go and meet people and talk to them about the movie and stuff like that, and take pictures. And everybody dresses up, for the event on Mackinac Island and at the actual Grand Hotel. They filmed the entire thing there and in Chicago. Everything was on location. There was nothing like in a studio lot or anything like that. It was all on site, which makes it so much more authentic, right?
Oh,
And yeah, so it's so awesome that they do this. And it's funny because there's actually there's actually like a rule there, or what, I don't know if it's a law or if it's like just something that they enforce, but you're not supposed to have motor vehicles there.
really?
Yeah, so they actually had to pull some strings to be able to get a scene or two for this movie, to have a car in this movie on the island, because like nobody does it even to this day. Like it's not allowed. You have to either walk, go by bike, or like horse and buggy. So
That's really interesting. Wow, I did not know that. Oh, that's very cool that they do a yearly celebration there. It's a beautiful, beautiful location. But yeah, something like that is something that would be very interesting, to go to and see, because it's very much a snapshot of the past. No pun intended. Well, actually, pun is probably fully intended, but
I kind of thought so.
Man, well, the last interesting fact that I found about this film was that there was a follow-up sequel to the movie that was done in the form of a book called Memoirs of Elise, that was written by David L. Gurney. The book answers the questions of what happened to Elise during the 60 years that she spent apart from Richard, and how she discovers where Richard Collier had come from, and how she ends up finding him, which of course leads into the events of the movie. And the book was written in, as far as I can tell, in 1997. But it appears to be almost unavailable. When I looked on Amazon, there's no used copies of it or anything. And I was not able to track down any copies of it, which of course made me want to own it all the more. So, it looks like it was almost like a novella a little bit. It was looks like it runs about 104 pages. On Amazon, it has a score of 3.9 out of 5 from 5 ratings. So it doesn't seem like it was widely read, or that could just be because it was, had such a limited run and was unavailable. So were you aware of this like sequel book, or have you read it or run across it anywhere?
Yeah, I am familiar with it. I haven't read it personally. It's something I would love to read, but like you said, it's really hard to find. I mean, keep your eyes peeled on eBay, folks, because I mean, it's it's one of those things where it's not that widely available. There probably wasn't a lot of copies made, and I remember seeing, and I can't remember if it was like a YouTube clip or something. I remember seeing like a video interview where they were actually at the Grand Hotel in the theater there, and they were actually in the audience in the chairs, and they were in the seating, and they were talking about this, this Memoirs of Elise and kind of what happens over that time period, and a fascinating concept. Absolutely. I mean, it'd be great to read about, but I haven't been lucky enough to come across it. I'm actually trying to save up and see if I can buy the actual shooting script that they had for the movie. I know it's out there and whatnot, so I'm trying to get that as well. But it's also interesting because, like I mentioned at the top, like this is based on a book called Bid Time Return that they eventually changed to Somewhere in Time when the movie came out. But there's also a couple other books that's on the Insight website No pun intended on that one. Um, there's a couple of them. So the first one's The Somewhere in Time Story by Bill Shepard, who is, like you mentioned, the founder of Insight. And then there's also, The Somewhere in Time Story talks about, the making of the movie, and has lots of like pictures and stuff like that. There's also a book that was written by one of the producers of the movie called The Force is With You: Mystical Movie Messages That Inspire Our Lives. It's written by Stephen Simon. So that's also on the website. I also want to read that too. I was not aware of that till recently, and that sounds very interesting. So I'd love to check that out as well. But Memoirs of Release, yeah, if I could read it, I definitely could.
Definitely. Yeah. Like I said, I'm going to be keeping my eyes out for it because, I was definitely enjoyed the movie enough that I would like to read that book. And like I said, just the fact that it's so hard to get just, makes that even more so. Well, yeah. So, definitely, let's talk a little bit here, on theories, because one thing that, I did not expect, going into this movie was I was expecting a romantic film with, a sci-fi twist of time travel in there. I was not necessarily expecting a movie that had a lot of kind of theoretical subtext in it that kind of alluded to certain things without necessarily giving answers to it. That there was just a lot that, I found after the movie was done that I was thinking back on, that I was like, oh, they didn't really give definitive answers to this, but they hinted at certain things. And to me, sometimes I find movies even more fascinating when a script puts a lot of hints and innuendos in, but doesn't necessarily, overtly explain something, because I think it allows you to kind of like think about and theorize a little bit more. So definitely, I think, this film gives us some very interesting things to talk about Christopher Plummer's character, W.F. Robinson, some of the ideas of time travel and some of the other stuff. So I guess let's kick off kind of the theories section of this review, and feel free to jump in with your own theories that you had thought of and everything. But I guess let's get started with talking about just who Christopher Plummer's character of W.F. Robinson was, because I feel like there was a lot of mystery surrounding him, and I feel like there was a few innuendos that he might not have been exactly who we thought he was. I don't know. What do you think?
That is an excellent question. So I watched the movie this time around with that in mind. I was really keeping an eye on that aspect of it. And yeah, it is almost in every scene that he's in, there's some kind of vibe or reference to him knowing that Richard Collier was coming to be there. So yeah, it is fascinating. Maybe it sort of make me think, hey, maybe this guy is also a time traveler as well.
Yeah, that was absolutely kind of what I thought too, was like, I thought that there was going to be, like, I was expecting maybe some type of reveal of him either being another time traveler. I was even wondering, like, is he supposed to be an older version of Richard Collier, or something, but yeah, like, I feel like there was those hints kind of Elise saying like, oh, he seems to know about my career before it happens, and like you said, he knows Richard Collier is coming. And he's doing his best to try and stop him, which is ironically enough kind of the paradox of like his very actions are kind of what, possibly leads to what he fears happening. There was another theory that I read online that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to ask you about, that there was a fan theory online that some people kind of presented the idea that Robinson may have been the one who planted the penny on Richard Collier. And I thought, oh, that's very interesting, because we do see him going through his pockets before and seemingly removing all of the old change, but then he finds one. And so, of course, we have the option that he just missed one. But then that one fan theory of them saying that, Robinson is somebody from, from the future. He's some kind of time traveler, and he plants that penny to get rid of him. And I thought, oh, that's another interesting theory. So I thought I wanted to ask you, and what your thoughts of that one were.
Man, I'm not sure I've heard that one before. Maybe I have and I forgot about it, but I don't remember that one. I mean, it's fascinating to think about. Yeah, I guess I'm not familiar with that one. I mean, my guess, my hunch, my gut tells me that, I think Richard just missed one by accident. I mean, those little pennies, sometimes you don't realize, that they're in your pocket, then you think you got it and there's still one left. That was my impression that I got, but I'm always open to the opposite, an alternate way of viewing it. So, I mean, it's super interesting. With the book, actually, and with the whole thing with the penny, is that he actually flips a coin before he goes to the hotel. A flip of a coin to decide, like heads or tails, is he going to go or not? And so that's kind of like the thing that is like that thing that ties back to the end of the story in the book with him finding the penny. Which the book is also, I mean, it's structurally very similar, but the details within it are very, very different. Which I think is probably worth mentioning as well. With the book, Richard Matheson. He wrote the book, but Richard Collier, in the book, in the beginning, it's very different because in the beginning he's diagnosed with a brain tumor and is given like 4 or 5 months to live.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and that's why he's just kind of traveling, just kind of taking processing, taking it in, and then he ends up going to this hotel, which is actually in the book, it's a different hotel. It's I think it's the Coronado Hotel in San Diego. It's not the Grand Hotel, and of course the Coronado is where they filmed Some Like It Hot, right? It's like the big thing, the big movie that everyone remembers it by, from filming there. But so it takes place there, and then and I'm sorry if I'm spoiling this for everybody. I've just realized it now that I'm going into spoiler detail. Please read the book first if you haven't, if you're really interested in not wanting it spoiled, because I feel like it's really important to talk about here, especially with the differences with the book and the movie. But at the end of the book, I mean, yes, I mean, it's somewhat similar, maybe not entirely the same, but he sees the penny, he goes back to the present, and then he dies shortly after. Right, just like in the movie. But in the book at the end, it kind of details like the doctor thinks that this account, this story of going back in time, is just this fantasy in his mind as he was about to pass away. Right.
Interesting.
And then his Richard Collier's brother is actually, his character's in the book, but not in the movie. Robert Collier, he actually reads this story and he actually thinks that maybe he did go back in time. I mean, the level of detail that he said what happened, and his conviction was like so it's kind of like left like ambiguous, like up for debate. The doctor thinks no, it was just a fantasy, but his brother's like maybe he did. So that's a super interesting concept as well.
Man, yeah, there's definitely a part of me that kind of wishes that plot was in the movie, because that is really interesting, and I really like that kind of ambiguous part of adding into the end of like, oh, did it really happen? Was it a hallucination? Whatever. That's very interesting. But I think that's interesting that the author chose not to include it for the film. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's and also another interesting fact too is Arthur is not in the book.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And he's such a great character.
Oh, he's a great character. I really enjoyed it, and I love the little callbacks of him having the vague recollection of him, as a kid, and it was kind of cool. Like I liked that connection from the past to the future there of like a character. I don't know. I think it just kind of added a cool aspect for me. And just the actor Bill Irwin is awesome, and so just seeing him in there was really cool.
Yeah, I agree. He was so good in that role. Great actor and playing a great character. Absolutely, yeah. And it's also a cool way of tying back, both time periods. It's a way of connecting both of them too. And having that character show up in both, right? And and so I think that was a great addition to the movie. And to be honest, I think I like a lot of the changes they made to the movie more than what were in the book. I think they made the right changes most of the time.
Yeah, no, I agree because it flowed really well and the decisions that they did do, did work, I think. So like, I don't, definitely hearing about some of those changes that existed, I don't think that it hurt, the film in any way, definitely. So I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one, interesting question that I had kind of, and I thought I'd ask your opinion on, this was another theory that I read online, was, in regards to, and of course, the spoilers always for everybody, go watch the movie, before you listen to this.
Too late now.
Is the circumstances of Richard Collier's death, at the end of the film, his tragic demise, of course. The one theory that I read that I thought was very interesting, because of course, you kind of, the film leads you to believe, that he kind of dies of, like a broken heart, he hasn't been eating or drinking or anything, and he kind of ends up, basically passing away from being, just brokenhearted over what had happened. Which is generally what I tend to think, is what did happen, because that's just what it looks like. But then there was also an interesting fan theory that I read, and just, I have to say, I love the fact that this movie, even over the last few years, still spawns so many fan theories online on Reddit and everything. I just think that's a sign of a great movie. So I had to go off the beaten track and say that. But it was this one theory that was interesting, that they were, saying like, oh, at the ending, when Arthur and them break into the room to find him, and he's kind of almost like comatose looking, they're saying he hasn't eaten for a week, that they were almost asking the question of, was he actually at that point traveling in time a little bit? Was he able to kind of like do some, was he trying again where he kind of slightly succeeded in something? And is that why he was comatose? Because when he traveled in time, his body stayed back. And so he was actually kind of wasting away because he wasn't eating or drinking, because it was this kind of weird time travel with his consciousness. And so I thought, oh, that's a really fascinating theory to think about. And so I'll ask you your opinion on that one from Reddit user 90215, or, whatever it was.
I thought for sure you were going to say 90210.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I mean, I know in the movie, like before he time travels, when he's talking to the professor about it, which is also a great stuff too, as well. I mean, great scenes, just kind of exploring the concept of, is this even possible? And talking about the theoretics of it. And, when they're talking about it, that professor, Richard Collier's college professor that he had, who wrote the book about traveling through time, it's interesting because, like, he tells Richard, like, I thought I did for a moment, for a split second, I thought I was there, but there was too many things reminding me of the present that were like in his view. And so like, he couldn't stay there he was only there for like a split second, and he came back, which was, I think he said he went back like a couple hundred years in time for that. So, and he was theorizing, like, if one were to remove everything reminding you of the present, you could like use hypnosis, and you could, believe that you're there, and that will take you there. Because time in your headspace, time isn't linear, I guess, is the idea. And he also, Richard's like, well, didn't you do it again? And he said no, because it was very taxing on his body, and it was very tiring on him, even for a split second. It took a lot out of him. So that was a really interesting concept too, to think about, is like, even just a split second took a lot out of this professor, and Richard was back there for a lot longer than that, Yeah,
I feel like he was back there for, I feel like maybe a couple of weeks possibly, or something. It was quite a while.
I mean, it's supposed to seem like quite a while, but I think it was only a couple days.
Oh, okay. I think still a lot longer than a split second,
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, when you see him wake up, you see him, he's covered in sweat, like his suit is just pure sweat, so it's just very visible on him. So you can tell that, yes, it did take a lot out of him. But it's also interesting to think about too, like, when that professor said you have to remove everything reminding you of the present, so you can't see it, so you can fully immerse yourself and believe that you're there. What's interesting is that, when he's in the past, right, and he's hanging out with Elise, and they're going for the walk, and they go up by the rocks by the by the water and by the lighthouse, and they kind of talk and whatnot, and then they go to that gazebo area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's talking about that pocket watch that he has. She's like, "Oh, where did you get it?" And he says, "It was given to me." Which in that moment, wouldn't that make him think of the present? Because it was given to him. I mean, sure, maybe it came from the past, right? Which is cool how that kind of loops together, right? How it goes back and forth from the present to the past, and how it's maybe from the past, but how Richard has it, but then Elise has it when Richard goes back to the present, and then so she has it all those years to give back to him in the past, so that he could have it when he goes back to the So it's just you know what I'm saying, but so it's super interesting. Like, wouldn't you think that him like thinking, oh yeah, in the back of his mind when he says that it was given to him, he has to know, yeah, you gave it to me like 68 years from now. 68 years in the future from now, and he would think of the elderly Elise McKenna, and you would think that would maybe kind of start to bring him back, but maybe because it's not something physical that you can tangibly see, because it's an item that is a relic from the past, maybe that doesn't bring it back. And he does change the subject. He's like, hey, let's go do whatever. Like, he does change the subject right away. So I just wanted to mention that. I thought that was a really interesting idea to explore.
No, I agree. And, and it kind of leads into kind of the next theory thing of just the whole idea of time travel, within this film, kind of like the rules that it establishes. And just going off of what you kind of said, that I think it's very interesting of what it kind of creates with the whole thing with the watch, with young and old Elise, that, we're almost kind of seeing like a time loop almost, that, he couldn't go back in time without having already been there before. And almost kind of, insinuates that that's why he couldn't travel back to see her again, because he already knew that he had never gone back before, because she, was old when she found him again.
Right.
And so, it's a very fascinating idea of how it presents. Obviously the method of travel is very unique, very original. But yeah, I love the rules that it establishes of the loops and the paradoxes, and what brings him in and out, and then, like I said, kind of adding into those kind of other theories of Christopher Plummer's character of was he a separate time traveler who was involved in a loop as well? Are there other, time loops all over the world that are kind of like that, or are they only, connected to certain locations, almost like what the professor, was talking about? I think it's just a very interesting idea to consider.
Yeah, it is a really interesting idea to consider. Absolutely. And I think, is there others, that's the ultimate question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I personally don't want to see a sequel to this movie ever, or a remake. I think this movie should just be as it is, unless the right person were to come along with the right take on it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that it's going to be me. I'm not saying I don't have an idea of what I would do if I were to continue this in some way, shape, or form. But I'm just saying, unless the right person with the right take and the right kind of spirit would come along to do something like that, I wouldn't want this to be touched. But it's interesting, like the idea of time travel, and it's tough. I mean, personally, I prefer stories with time travel that are not in the vein of all right, let's go back and change the past, right? And then you got to fix it, right? I'm thinking of, obviously movies like the Terminator franchise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or stuff like, even the Flashpoint storyline, from The Flash, right? Things where you go back in time and you change something in the past, which sets off a butterfly effect, so everything changes. And I don't prefer that typically in time travel kind of movies. I like the concept and the idea that everything that you've done, everything that's been done in the past matters and means something. It can't just be erased just because just purely based on a plot device to add drama to the story. I've never been a fan of that. So I always like it when, something's maybe like meant to be, or you don't know, but you discover along the way that it was kind of meant to be, and everything still matters, and nothing's erased or taken away or changed out. We don't have George Clooney showing up at the end for whatever reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree with you. Yeah. Cause I think, the idea of, like you said, changing the past, fixing the future, something like that, it's been done so many times, and everything, that it's not a super interesting concept. And, in my opinion, kind of, like what you were saying, that time travel itself, as the character, the concept is just not as interesting. It's the characters that are interacting with time travel that make the story interesting. And that's why I think Somewhere in Time, kind of holds up so well, is because you're not watching it for the time travel element. You're watching it for the interactions and the relationships. And then the time travel just adds, kind of more, more things to unpack, and just adds more depth to those characters.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the key thing here, is it's all about the characters and how it matters and how it relates to those characters and how it tells the story, and it's not just done as a gimmick, just as a way to add extra drama, right? To increase that, the difficulty of, now we gotta, don't get me wrong. I really enjoy the Back to the Future movies, especially the first two. I think are magnificent. I think they're great. They're awesome. They're a lot of fun. But yeah, they do go back and change things in the past. It's a fun movie, right? I'm not saying I'm not open to the concept, but generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of that. And I think, one of the things that with this movie, it isn't done just as a way to, now we need to fix it, and that's the driving force of the movie. It is about the characters. It is the whole movie itself is connected, past and present. The whole thing is tied together very neatly, very intricately, very well written, very well filmed. The whole 9 yards. I mean, I don't know why they even say 9 yards, because in football it's 10 yards for first down. I don't know why they say 9. We're just second and 1.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's true. I have to ask you, just, because since we're talking about the idea of, like, the time travel with relationships, have you seen the time travel romance film About Time from 2013?
No, I don't think I have.
I feel like you actually might like that, because it's in the vein of Somewhere in Time, in the sense of, kind of the romance and the relationships with characters dealing with the time travel. It's not like a thriller or anything. It is a little bit more it's more comedic. I want to say, it's a little bit like a dramedy, a little bit. But it has, Bill Nighy, Rachel McAdams, Margot Robbie, Donald Gleason. It has a great cast, a really good cast. Vanessa Kirby, I think, is in it too. It's basically about this guy who he's 21, and his dad tells him that all of the males in their family are able to travel in time by basically visualizing in their head somewhere they want to go, and then they can travel to that period in their life. And they can almost like hop back in time to portions of their life, basically. So like if they imagine they want to go 5 years back to their life, they jump back to that period. And it's kind of, the decision of how he's discovering that he's able to do this, but he's also using it, to try and like woo his girlfriend, to get married and all this different stuff. It's a very, very great movie, really entertaining, a lot of fun, and just kind of adds that different twist to time travel with the characters. So yeah, I feel like you might like it.
Awesome. And it's called About Time.
Yes. About Time. Yeah. From 2013. Yeah. I want to say, I think it was the same director who did Love Actually and Notting Hill, I think.
Oh.
Yeah, it might have been the same guy. So yeah, definitely. If you ever check it out, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, it's about time I check it out, huh?
Yeah. Oh man. So, moving on to one of our second to last sections here, which is something I call quotes that stuck with us, of some, particular lines in the movie that we like, that we identified with, that, that hit us in a certain way. Is there any particular ones that like jump out at you before I read some of the ones that I liked?
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah. So, I think, there's obviously some kind of iconic lines in the movie. I think, obviously the first one, is the most haunting line in the movie, where it's the older Elise who comes up to him and says, come back to me. I think that it's just like, you're watching the movie, you don't really know what's going on. And then you just have this haunting moment. That's really cool. That just sets the whole movie in motion.
Yeah, that's a great pick. Especially right away in the movie, it's really something that's like, it makes especially everyone in the scene just kind of stops and is like silent and is like, what is happening right now? Like they know something strange is happening, something big is happening, but they don't know what it is and why it's happening. Right? Who is this elderly lady who's just parting the sea to come up and to say that to him? And then just walk away, and they're like, what just happened? But there is a funny story though that I wanted to save that from that Back to Somewhere in Time featurette from the DVD and the Blu-ray. There was actually, I can't remember who said that. It might have been Jeannot Swart, but he was saying that in that scene, Susan French, the actress who was the older Elise, she actually one of the takes that they did for that scene, she went up to Chris Reeve and she gave him that pocket watch, and she, instead of saying "come back to me," she said, "have it fixed, dear."
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, just a good way to break the tension. And
oh, that's really funny. I love little stories like that, especially when actors do like comedic improvisations. It's really funny.
Yeah, so good.
Oh, and a lot of these quotes obviously are from Elise, because there's so much. The next one that I really liked was when she says, there is so much to say, I cannot find the words except for these: I love you. Just a great line for a romance film.
Yeah, and it's at the end of such a wonderful like monologue that is all improvised right during the performance, and she's just staring at Richard Collier the whole time, because she's just speaking from the heart, right? And the man of my dreams almost faded now, and then everybody looks around like, what is happening? What? That's not in the script. And then she just goes off, and it's so wonderfully done. It's such tremendous, on her part, not only as a part of the improvising that line in the play and how it's performed, but also for Jane Seymour bringing that to life, and I know as part of that documentary featurette that she actually had mentioned that they had to go back and do like a reshoot of that scene. There was something that didn't look right or whatever, so they went back to do a close-up of her reading off part of that speech, of her like performing that, I should say. And this was obviously like during the reshoot, so everyone had left production. Christopher Reeve wasn't there anymore. He was making Superman 2, the theatrical Lester cut, and there was nobody in the seats. No one was there in the auditorium. So they needed somebody for her to be performing this to, right? This, because in the scene she's looking at Christopher Reeve's character, right? So they actually had the writer, the author and screenwriter Richard Matheson. He was there on set, and he sat in place of Richard, and she was performing it to him, pretending it was Chris Reeve. And I guess she had said that he was so like emotionally affected by that performance that he actually left and went home and just hugged his wife.
Oh, wow.
It just affected him so deeply, I guess. So that's just another one of those really cool stories that they talk about.
That's incredible, because that monologue was amazing, and that's actually part of the monologue is the next quote, because it was just so good, where she says, the man of my dreams has almost faded now, the one I've created in my mind, the sort of man each woman dreams of in the deepest and most secret reaches of her heart. I can almost see him now before me. What would I say to him if he were really here? Just such a fantastic monologue, and probably one of the best parts of the movie, honestly, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. Yep. That's a big part, a big part there. Yep. Absolutely. It also became a key part of the commercial for Kay Jewelers.
Oh,
You know,
interesting. I didn't
with
know that. Huh.
yeah, because like Jane Seymour is in, and this is probably years back now, but Jane Seymour was in those commercials, and she would actually recite that part, the deepest and most secret reaches of our hearts. She would actually say that as part of the commercial. Every kiss begins with K. For K Jewelers. So, yeah, it actually became part of that commercial, those commercials.
Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, that's a great little bit of information for that. Oh, and the last quote that I think was good was a great scene with Christopher Plummer, William Fawcett Robinson, where Christopher Reeve is his character is accusing him of being in love, with Elise, and that's why he's controlling her, and he says, do you actually believe that I've nurtured her, cared for her, molded, taught, developed her for all these years merely to groom a wife, a star? Only someone with the limited awareness of your age could possibly conceive that my entire passion for this woman is no more than physical. Christopher Plummer just delivers that whole mini monologue so well.
He really does. He really does.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about that too, I think it might have been part of the director's commentary for this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while since I've seen that, but I do remember this part was that Jeannot Swark did mention that he had to actually cut down that scene in the editing room. It was actually a bit longer, and he said that Christopher Plummer did such an amazing job, really, really getting really deep into the why of the character in that moment. And he said it was so, so good, but he said he had to trim it back and trim it down for editing reasons, for pacing for the movie. And so he's like, I hope he forgives me because it was so good. It was such a wonderful performance. And he's like, and I had to cut part of it. And it's, and like you said, it still works really well. That's a great delivery. That's very well said on his part. Very well performed by Christopher Plummer. It's a really pivotal scene, a big moment as well. And between those two characters, they really kind of get down to the meat and potatoes of it. And yeah, I personally like why haven't we seen these deleted scenes? Yes. Why haven't we seen some of this stuff? That would be so great. Hey, Universal, if you're listening, it would be super awesome if you guys would do a 4K restoration of this movie. And hey, maybe you can include some deleted scenes, and include all the special features. Maybe you can get some newer ones, updated ones. Hey, I think this movie would be amazing in 4K with HDR. It could be HDR 10 plus, right? It doesn't have to be Dolby Vision, or Dolby Atmos. But I think this, obviously has an amazing soundtrack. With such beautiful visuals, with the Mackinac Island and obviously and in Chicago in the beginning part. So I think this would just be incredible on that format. So I really hope that happens.
I completely agree. It's amazing to me that this film is not already in the Criterion Collection, honestly.
Yeah.
It's like, because I completely agree. I think 4K would be incredible. I would love to see, those deleted scenes, because those scenes exist, they're on some server somewhere. And so it would be great to really see those, or hey, even put together an extended cut, where they add those deleted scenes into the film, Jeannot
Swark's still alive, he's still here with us. A lot of the people who were involved in making this movie sadly are no longer with us, because that was almost 44 years ago when they made this movie now, as of this recording for this episode. So it's been a long time. So unfortunately, we have lost some people who were heavily involved with the making this movie. But Jeannot Swark, the director, he's still around. He's retired, but hey, I think he would be totally down for it.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah, because he's like you said, he's retired now, but yeah, very spry guy, obviously, because he was working up until 2019, still directing, so yeah, I think he would be down for it. And so yeah, definitely, Universal, please get to work on that. There's obviously an audience for it, yes. And with physical media having a bit of a resurgence now, I think that something like this would definitely be successful, and I'll just go ahead and throw that in there. Why don't you make it a steelbook as well?
Hey, that would be also super awesome. It's sad that so many places aren't carrying not even
Oh,
steelbooks, but even just carrying physical copies of movies anymore, like Best
mhm,
Buy and Target. It blows me away that they're not even.
mhm.
It's not even so much like. I mean, yes, obviously it's great to go there in person and buy physical media, but they're not even having it on their website for the most part anymore. So it's
It's
like
true. Mhm,
it's just Amazon and like Walmart. Like that's it. Like it's like
mhm. It's
it's
so
sad.
true. It's very sad because I know I was at Walmart the other day and I saw how they'd cut down their physical media section by a lot, and I saw they had a bunch of older TV shows in there, and I saw they had a complete set of Gunsmoke, all 20 seasons, and it was $200, and I was like, oh man, it's a lot of money, and stuff. But I was like, I really do need to eventually get something like that because eventually that stuff it's not going to be available anymore.
True.
And and so I was like, oh man, I gotta figure out at some point, gotta shell that out and get those 20 seasons to add to my collection.
Yeah, get it before it gets out of Dodge.
Yeah. uh, so moving to our final section here, titled Under the Lens, much like the podcast here. How would you who would you say is is the best actor in the sense of who carried this film, would you say the most, or who delivered the best performance in your opinion? Anything like that. Who would you say for Somewhere in Time?
Oh, that's tough.
It is tough.
It's just they were all so good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, literally from Christopher Reeve, Jane Seymour, Christopher Plummer, as the leads, like they did a tremendous job. Even a lot of the supporting cast, like Teresa Wright was only in a few scenes in this movie, and she was great. Susan French as the older Elise McKenna, I thought that was so cool to see her in this movie. I thought she did a really great job. And Bill Irwin, I mean, as Arthur, I mean, that was a great supporting character as well.
Mm-hmm.
As Bill Irwin, and of course the younger, the child actor who was younger Arthur it was always fun as well. So it's so tough. I'm going to stick with Christopher Reeve though, just because I have such an affinity for for everything he did on screen and off screen. In terms of everything about him is just I've always been such a big fan. He's a very authentic human being. I wish more people were like him in this world today. We really need it. And I feel like in this movie, I feel like in Somewhere in Time, he is the main character of the movie. He is the protagonist throughout. And I think this movie doesn't work if he doesn't work. If he doesn't bring his A game, if he doesn't deliver, I don't think this movie works. As great as Jane Seymour and Christopher Plummer and everybody else was, I feel like he is the one that really takes this movie from start to finish. So on this journey, so I am going to pick Christopher Reeve.
Mm-hmm. Man, great choice because it is true. Everyone was so good, and it was very, very tough for me to choose somebody because, I feel like even with who I choose, it's like we're not saying the rest of the actors weren't good in their roles because they were excellent. But yeah, I agree with you. I think I have to go with Christopher Reeve for it, just because, like you said, the movie doesn't exist without him. He really very much ties everything together. He turns in a very nuanced performance. He adds all these little things, to Collier. He's not just playing, this straightforward guy. I love how we get to see how, once he travels back in time, he suddenly realizes he doesn't know what he's going to say to her. He's like, and he's trying to figure out, well, what do I say? How do I approach her? There's all these little things that sometimes I think modern movies can get lost in the plot so much that they kind of, go over the smaller details. And I really appreciated how Christopher Reeve brought those smaller details of his character out to be, very, very likable, very lovable.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not always just about what he's saying or even the way he's saying it, but it's also just the expression on his face or his body language too.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Like you said, he was a very unique actor. And yeah, we haven't really, I would say we haven't really had anyone like him again, really, I would say. It's just extremely tragic how his career was cut short, because I think he would have his career would have blossomed even more just over the years, I think.
Yeah, he was on a bit of a career resurgence at that point. He was in Remains of the Day, and that was a big hit. It was a Best Picture nominee that year. And granted, he was a supporting character, as a side character in the movie, but I thought he was great in that. I thought he was great in it. And he was, I think, in his autobiography, Still Me, he actually mentioned that he was going to be in I think it was Francis Ford Coppola. He was going to be in one of his movies upcoming.
Oh, wow. Uh-huh.
At the time when he had that accident. And then, of course, when he had the accident, he obviously couldn't be in the movie. But I agree. And it's tough, but what happened. And obviously, you look at, making the best out of a not great situation. And, he was able to, with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, for, spinal cord research, spinal injury research, is just everything they've done ever since then, to raise awareness for it and raise funding for, trying to develop ways to help, to cure it, to help, to fix it, to, repair an injury of that sort, is just tremendous and just so inspiring.
Mm-hmm. It's incredible. Yeah, I read an article recently about, there was a man who had been paralyzed, and they did something with it was some new technology that mixed like AI with some robotics stuff that they inserted surgically into him, and he was able to walk again. He had to use a walker, of course, but it, like, compared to what he was before, and the family of Christopher Reeves, that they were, praising it and talking about how amazing it was. And they were laughing, saying, you know what, if our dad was still around, he would have been the first to sign up for something like this, to test it for other people. And it just kind of goes back to what you were saying of him being, just such a great human being, a great person, as well as a great actor.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I think I remember seeing that too. And it was the older gentleman, right?
Yeah, yes, he was older.
I remember he was actually, because I think it was Will Reeve, Chris's son, Will. He was there because he's actually a journalist, a reporter, right? And funny how that works, right? But and that, when he was talking with him, doing the interview with the guy actually started getting up and was telling him to show him his moves, like he started like dancing or whatever, since he could walk again. And Will's like, I don't know how to dance, and he's like, come on, you can do better than that. It was just it was so great.
Oh, that's really great. Oh man, well, I would say, what would you say are, looking back on the movie, what are your top 3 scenes that you would say that just stand out the most to you?
Top 3 scenes. Well, it's tough when you only have 3. Mm-hmm. When I would like to have like 20.
Yeah.
So I forgive you for that. However, top 3. I mean, you definitely have to have the scene when Richard first meets Elise back in the past. When he finally walks up to her, and it's really cool because in that moment when of course, there's kind of a gag, like, before that, when he goes to the dressing room and it's a different lady who's there, and she's trying to be all smoochy, and he's like, I'm out of here. And and then he goes out to the, and he sees her out there. But I liked the way that they did it. Janos works that he wanted the audience to see her first before Richard did. Mm-hmm. So he goes out and he's looking out, and it's showing his face, but it also shows to the side, and to the left of the background, that there's someone who's like painting in there, and then he like pulls the blind over his window, which it then becomes like a mirror, so you can see, the reflection, and then you see Elise on the left side. You see her walking along, and you see her, and then of course Richard also sees her too, and then walks towards her, and you see him in the reflection walking towards her, right? Which I thought was just a brilliant choice cinematically. And then I
loved that camera shot.
It was great. And then the other cool part of that too is that to me, at least my interpretation, when you look at the right side of that reflection, so the left side, you see her walking, just kind of strolling along, and then you see him going towards her. But on the right side, to me, it looks exactly like the elderly Elise when she's sitting in that rocking chair looking out at the beach the night she passes away. It looks exactly like that, which I thought is cool because it shows both sides of her and also kind of expresses cinematically, visually, Richard going to her, you know, in the past to the younger Elise, you know. So I think that was just another cool way of that to show off that I don't know what to say spirituality-ness of it or however you'd phrase it, but so definitely. Sorry, that's my long-winded way of saying that's scene number one that I would definitely pick for that moment. But the other two scenes, I would say it definitely has to be the scene where it's it's tough. I mean, I guess I would say the performance scene, you know, just to see that performance and to see everybody's reactions and stuff like, you know, to the how she does it. And then I would also say probably the scene with William Fawcett Robinson and Richard Collier at the gazebo, that night scene when they're having that big, you know, emotional, like heart to heart, you know, of, you know, who Elise is going to be with, right? Because obviously she wants to be with Richard, and that obviously doesn't sit so well with Robinson. So I would probably say those three are probably the most pivotal. But I could list like 5 more off the, you know, just very easily because there's so many good scenes. So I'm curious what your top 3 are going to be.
Oh yeah, you know, like you said, there's so many good scenes, you know, in there that it is hard to just choose 3. But I would say probably, yeah, in no particular order of top 3. I would say, you know, for me, one, the scene that you mentioned of the blinds going down in the first shot of when he first sees her. I loved that camera angle. It was just such an inventive shot. I really, really liked it. And it was funny because I remember when the shot first happened and I saw, you know, the guy pull the blinds down, I thought, oh, that's funny. I thought, I wonder why they included that in there, because I thought it doesn't seem to go with the scene. And then I saw it all come together and I thought, oh man, it's just a brilliant cinematography. So definitely I would agree that one there. Then I would also say when Richard Collier first sees the painting of Elise in the hotel, you know, that whole sequence of the light and his facial expression and just him falling in love with her through that painting. I loved that entire sequence. I thought that was just very, very, very well done.
Oh man, that's such a great scene too. Why didn't I pick that one?
so good. And then I think my third one that I have to do is probably, you know, the tragic moment of him finding the penny in his pocket. You know, that scene is just, you know, they're finally happy. You see that their love is blossoming. They're going to get married. They're going to live the rest of their lives. They're going to be happy forever. You know, and then, you know, I just loved kind of the shot, you know, of him pulling it out, how it zooms in on the penny. You see that and kind of it does the whole like distorted camera shot, you know, of him being pulled back. You know, very, very well done scene, I thought. You know, seeing her reaction to it and everything, just I really, really liked that one. It was a very painful scene, not a happy scene, definitely.
That's probably why I didn't pick it, because it just emotionally just rips my heart out every time. So that's probably why I didn't pick it.
Yeah, it was funny because like I remember when I was telling my mom about the movie after I saw it, you know, and you know, she's like, was it good? And I said, oh, it was a great movie. I really liked it. And so she's like, oh, does it have a happy ending? And I said, oh no. I said, it's completely tragic. You know, it's like, you know, I was like, it's completely a tragic ending. She's like, oh man, you know, it's like,
yeah, I know what you mean, because you know, like when I watched it tonight, my wife actually watched it for the first time, as you know, similar to you. She'd also had never seen it before, so it was her first time seeing it. And yeah, at the end, you know, I asked her, you know, what she thought, and you know, I got her permission to say this before I came on here, but she was actually like tearing up, like she was crying, and I was and it was kind of funny. I was like, oh, so did you like it though? And she's like, why do you like this movie? It's so sad. She said it was good, but she didn't think she wasn't sure she'd be able to watch it again because it just is so sad, that they had spent their whole lives essentially not with each other. And I was like, she said, why do you like it? And I was like, well, I don't know. I just do.
It's true. There's certain movies, that just, that kind of grab onto you, a little bit. And that just kind of stick with you, over the years, and I have a few of those movies myself, and it's definitely I can relate to you, this is completely on the other end of the spectrum of movies, but like one example that I can give of a movie that I just really, really enjoy, that everybody else I know absolutely hates, is The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I have so much fun with that movie. It's just so much fun to watch. It's not a good movie by any stretch, but it's just so much fun. And I have so many friends all the time, like, I really like that movie. They're like, how can you like that movie? It's terrible. I'm like, I don't know. It's just fun. It's like, so
sometimes that's all that matters, right?
Yeah. And it just kind of goes back to the whole thing of what we were talking about with, critical opinion and everything, that everybody enjoys different stuff. And different movies, speak to different people, with different things, and and we connect with different emotions, with movies, and I can tell you right now, if my mom would have watched, Somewhere in Time with me, she would have felt the exact same way as your wife. She would have enjoyed it, but she would have said, why do you like this? It's so sad. It would have been the exact same.
That's funny. But that's just part of it. Everybody has different tastes and different ways of appreciating movie, or whether they like a movie or not. So it's subjective. I mean, it all depends on what your preferences are. And some people, maybe they just, this isn't the kind of movie that would sit well with them. And we all have our own different experiences. So the why of it, would always be different, I feel like, too. And
oh, absolutely. Sometimes when you see a movie, sometimes affects you, differently than, when somebody else might see it,
Right. Yep.
Man. All right. So now we are at the grading meter moment, where we will grade the film on a scale of 1 to 5 stars, 1 being the worst, obviously, and 5 being the best. So let's start with you, Darren. What is your star grading for this movie?
5.
5. Very nice.
Yeah. I mean, what more can I say? Yeah. I mean, what more can you say? Right. I mean, I've been such a big fan of this movie. Sure. It's maybe not a perfect movie, but what it's setting out to do, what it's trying to do, it goes far and above, right? To the point where, why do you like this movie? Honestly, sometimes I don't know. I have this connection, this passion for this movie. I think it's so well done. Obviously the acting, the cinematography, the script. I know, sure, maybe there are things that maybe could have been improved. Like sometimes you think of older movies, especially with like when you have like the courtly love aspect, right? The love triangle, however you want to describe it. Sometimes, like there's an 80s-ness to it. Maybe there's ways that it could have been improved, or, I like longer movies. I think this movie, if you add another 5 or 10 minutes in this movie, I would be like, the more the merrier. Like I want to live in this world, right? That's kind of the idea, right? So, I say 5. I'll give it a 5 star, because it just what it does so well that it just, I don't think a movie has impacted me much more, if there has been than this one. So
well, it's a great rating. For me, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Very good, because I really, really enjoyed it, and I loved the unexpectedness of it. That I went in expecting something and I got something completely different than what I was expecting, and it was very much of a subversion of expectations, in a good way. So definitely, I give it 4 stars, like you said. I would have liked, I would not have minded at all if the film was a little bit longer, because like you said, the world was very vibrant. The characters were very good. I would not have minded, this film being, like you said, 10, 15 minutes longer, get a solid 2 hours, exploring a little bit more. But yeah, it does what it sets out to do well. It pulls at your emotions and your heartstrings, makes you like the characters and fall in love with the characters, in a runtime that is, relatively brisk, with credits, an hour and, 43 minutes. So it's like, it's not a long time to get you to fall in love with the characters, but it manages to do it. So, it's definitely, I think, a home run of a film, definitely. So Darren, do you have any final thoughts, about this film that you would like to cover, that you would like to say to the audience about it? Mm-hmm.
Wow, where do I begin? It's interesting, and like this movie has just affected me so much, whether it be like the soundtrack or like just everything about this movie has just been. It was just, to me, I just such a big fan. I could go on and on. I could go on for hours talking about it, all the different aspects of it. I think there are even some minor details that, I could go on about too. Like, believe it or not, Meg Ryan is in this movie.
Really?
Yeah, it was one of her first roles as a cameo when he's back at the library researching about Elise McKenna. It's showing her back, unfortunately, but she's in there, like in the library, like doing whatever, like studying or whatever she's doing. So like she's in the movie. I mean, there's little things like the Easter eggs that are on Richard Culler's desk in the beginning. When it goes to 8 years later, it shows lots of different things that allude to like time travel and hypnosis and stuff like that. The reference to Maude Adams in the beginning. I mean, I could go on and on, but I feel like there's so much good stuff in here. I can understand why some people might think that it may be a little corny, like he dies of heartbreak and whatnot, which I might say I think has only been rivaled by Padme Amidala from Revenge of the Sith.
I would agree. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's actually, I'm kidding. This is a way better way of doing it than that movie. That was a joke. I don't think it. I like the concept in Star Wars: Revenge of the Sith, but I think it could have probably been done a little bit a little bit more nuanced to it. Might have helped in that aspect, but this movie does it really well. And I mean, I just want to give a couple shout outs and comparisons, I guess, at this point, if that's okay.
Oh, go for it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, when I think of other comparisons, obviously, like, Janos' work, in his past, after this movie, of course, he directed Supergirl, not the greatest movie, as everybody knows. Jaws 2, also not the greatest movie, but, I don't think it was, he jumped in to help save that movie to get it done. But he also directed episodes of Smallville.
Oh, interesting. Uh-huh.
And he didn't direct this particular episode that I'm going to reference, but stylistically and just the concept of it, of dreams and like the paranormal in that aspect, it reminds me of one of my favorite episodes of Smallville from season 3, episode 4, called Slumber, where Clark keeps falling asleep and then he'll stay asleep for like a day or a long period of time. And he, in his dreams, actually, he has a new next door neighbor, and he meets this girl who's going to be a new member, of Smallville High, and she's like trying to have her save him, but he can't because he's in a dream. He doesn't have his powers or whatever like he normally would, and it's all about like, and he starts finding out like, oh yeah, like there is a new next door neighbor, and it's a really fascinating thing that's kind of similar. There's a couple of Kevin Costner movies that kind of explore a similar concept of, blending, the reality and dreams and fantasy. Like you think of Field of the Dreams, right?
Oh, definitely. Mm-hmm.
There's another movie called Dragonfly that he did in 2002, which is kind of a guilty pleasure movie of mine. A lot of people have made reference to Titanic and how Somewhere in Time and Titanic are very similar movies. And, some people who are big fans of Somewhere in Time have said that James Cameron kind of ripped off the movie when he made Titanic.
You know, there is a lot, there honestly, that is true. I never thought about that, but there is a lot of very interesting similar themes to that. That's very true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's just very fascinating. Another good movie. But and then of course Time Traveler's Wife is another one that's kind of touches on that aspect, that if you're interested in this kind of into stuff, I would recommend checking out some of those options. You had mentioned About Time earlier, so that's a cool one. But I mean, this movie means so much to me in another way too, in the fact that it's actually one of the inspirations behind a novel that I'm working on. The goal was to hopefully finish it by the summer. Unfortunately, that's 99% chance that's not going to happen for a number of different reasons. So it'll probably come out in the summer of 2025 at the latest. But yeah, it's a young adult coming of age novel that may or may not be very inspired by this movie Somewhere in Time. So I would just say, like, it's such an influence on me that it's inspiring some of the work that I'm doing. And obviously, like I mentioned earlier, like studying dreams and premonitions and stuff like that.
Man, well, I'm very excited to be able to read your novel coming out. That sounds very cool. So definitely, yeah. And once it's out, we'll have to have you on the podcast again to do some promotion for it.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, man. Well, I definitely agree with everything that you said about the film. I think this is it's very special, very unique in a lot of ways. So I would tell people, definitely check it out, because even if you're not a huge fan of romance films, it's worth checking out just for the character development, the script, the music, the cinematography. It's if you're a fan of film, you should really check it out, just because of all the different well done things that it has. And just, if you're a fan of, films that have great casts, that play off of each other really well, it's worth it. If you like tragic romances, it's even better, because it's, you get that in there too. And like I said, someone like me who enjoys those epic romances like Pride and Prejudice, or, those other ones, this one was definitely right up my alley. So I was very glad that you turned me on to it, so that I could enjoy it. Because honestly, it would have taken me years probably to discover it, through all the movie lists and everything. So I'm very grateful to you for that. Thanks for coming on. I really enjoyed this episode. I think we got to delve into a lot of really interesting themes for the film.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. And, it's just, like I said, I was super excited for this, and to be able to talk about this movie and kind of bring the kind of attention to this movie that I feel like it deserves, and to really bring it forth for the next generation to enjoy as well. It's a movie that means so much that to me. And like I mentioned at the top, this is my favorite Christopher Reeve movie. I mean, yes, I'm such a huge fan of his Superman movies and some of his other movies he's done. I've seen pretty much almost every movie he's been in. I'm a huge Chris Reeve fan on and off screen. So, but this one I think is just it's my favorite. So I think that really means something.
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely agree. And so, everybody, you can go and see Somewhere in Time right now. It is streaming for free on Freevee right now, which is the free streaming app from Amazon.com. So you can watch it. There is ads included in it, but the ads were not actually gratuitous. That's where I saw it. So it was not too bad. If you are a fan of physical media like Darren and I both are, you can also pick up the Somewhere in Time Blu-ray, which is on Amazon currently right now for $18.54. You can also pick up the DVD for $12.05. Everybody on Amazon has a very, very positive view of this movie as well. It has almost 2,000 ratings currently for the Blu-ray, with an average of 4.8 out of 5 stars. So very, very well regarded movie. And so I would encourage you all, if you do want to see it, go ahead and pick up that Blu-ray, support physical media, push those sales up, so that we can tell the studios that we want more films like this. And the more that are more copies of Somewhere in Time that are sold on physical media, the more chances we're going to see, that Steelbook 4K that we want to see of it. So definitely go check it out. It will definitely be worth your time. And I think you all will really enjoy it. So Darren, where can people find you? Where can they follow your work? Where can they get your books? Listen to your podcasts, etc.
Yeah. So, and if you don't mind, I'll plug that. But can I plug a couple things additionally as well that relate to this movie?
Oh, of course. Yeah, go for it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So for me, you can find me a couple of different places. Of course, like Byron mentioned, I am the host, the one-man show behind Round 2, the film sequel podcast, where we talk about movie sequels, specifically the second movie in a film franchise. Right now, we have 37 full-length episodes that are out. I'm on a little bit of a break right now in between seasons. And like the most recent episode I did was for Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I had the guy from the Movie Flame YouTube channel, Morgan Ross, on there, and it was so much fun to be able to talk to him. And I have so many other great episodes. Byron has been on a couple episodes in the past that I've done, and I can't wait to have him back on again. I believe the episodes that we had done together were Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, and then we also talked about Wall Street, the sequel to Wall Street. So
those episodes were so much fun. Honestly, like of all of my podcast appearances, I think those are my favorite because it was so much fun talking about those two.
Yeah, I agree. Those are some of my favorites as well. It's such fun conversations. So yes, Round 2, the film sequel podcast. You can also find my book on Amazon, The SNY-Verse Saga, which is a nonfiction book that over 400 pages that covers the behind the scenes history of the Zack Snyder DC film universe, everything that happened. And when I say behind the scenes, it's what was out in the public, and it's written from a neutral perspective. So even though I'm a big Zack Snyder fan and a fan of his movies, especially his DC movies, it's written from a very neutral point of view, just laying out the facts, everything that happened, so you can make your own opinion on the subject matter itself. But yeah, it's called the SNY-Verse Saga, and it's on Amazon. You can find both of those on my website, www.oakvalleymediallc.com. And if you're looking for someone to help edit a book, I am also offering those services as well. Just saying. But like I mentioned to Byron here just a minute ago, there's a couple of things I want to plug in terms of Christopher Reeve and in terms of this movie that I feel like deserve a shout out. So first and foremost, I want to give a shout out to the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation for everything that they have done. I think is just absolutely tremendous and wonderful. I also want to give a shout out to the Caped Wonders Superman podcast. Jay Towers, Jim Bowers, those guys are so awesome, keeping the spirit of those movies alive. And they're also a big fan of this movie too. And hopefully one day it'll be so much fun to talk to them about Chris Reeve. So shout out to them. I also want to give a shout out to the, like we mentioned earlier, Insight International Network for Somewhere in Time enthusiasts. In great spirit of keeping the flame of this movie alive, the candle that goes out towards the end of the movie when they're, doing some stuff at night in the bedroom, when they're, when that candle goes out, everybody who's a part of Insight keeps that candle going, keeps that flame going, and keeps, the passion going from year to year. And I think it's just so wonderful. And so I definitely want to give them a shout out. I was also listening to a podcast when I was prepping for this called Talk Classic to Me. And they actually talked last year about this movie Somewhere in Time, probably for Valentine's Day. And they had such a wonderful conversation talking about this movie. It went into details and was just, I wanted to give them a shout out because it was such a great episode listening to it. And they also had talked about with something that happened with Jane Seymour with this movie, where she actually, I think it was 2022, so it would be, about a year and a half ago now, that she had actually revealed that when they were making this movie, her and Chris Reeve are actually like romantically together.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
Yeah. And then right before their big pivotal scene that they were shooting at the end, when they're together, like in love with each other, and when he eventually goes, when he finds the penny, that whole sequence, they actually filmed that right before that. They filmed that. Chris Reeve had found out that his ex-wife was pregnant with, and so he was going to be a father. And so obviously like they had to end their romance together, in real life outside of the movie. So that was, a big reveal, like, oh my goodness. So they had mentioned that, which is so great. Sorry, I'm rambling. I'll try to keep it on track as I finish up here. But lastly here, I just want to give a huge, huge shout out to this guy I know named Byron Lafayette and his podcast Under the Lens, because you bring so much passion and so much great energy and thought into everything you do, all the posts that you do on Facebook, and even for everything you do with film criticism in general. And I feel like you deserve a big shout out. This podcast is amazing. I remember listening to some of the other episodes, and it was just like, it was so awesome. Like, I enjoyed almost every guest you've had on here, and great conversations. You have a great podcast. You're a great film critic. I love your approach and your passion for stuff. I'm a big fan of you. So I appreciate you.
Oh, that means a huge amount to hear that. I really, really appreciate that, because yeah, knowing you're making an impact, on someone, just hearing that, really, really appreciate that. So thank you so much. That means a lot. Well, thank you all for listening so much. I do this podcast, for the listeners, for people to have a good time and enjoy themselves. This podcast is available wherever podcasts can be found, so you can find me on Spotify, Apple podcasts, Google Play, everywhere that you can think of, we are there. So, you can also follow me on Facebook, on Twitter, now called X, and I am also on Vero as well, Vero Tree Social. You can, if you want to read some of my reviews, I publish the Under the Lens column on viralhair.com, and I also write for Film Obsessive and 25yearslater.com, where I do like more longer form essay styles. And also be on the lookout as well. I do have a book that is going to be coming out either in the fall of this year or the spring of next year. And it's going to be titled After the Bombs, a Jericho retrospective. That's going to be about the cult classic TV show Jericho from CBS networks. So I'm very excited about that when it comes out. It's coming along really good. So if you're a fan of Jericho, I think you will be really excited for that book. So be on the lookout for that.
Yes.
Man, I know. I can't wait for you to read it too. I hope that it lives up to the quality that the SNY-Verse saga was. So that book was an inspiration for me.
You're too kind.
Oh no, that was a great book. And also too, I got a plug too for all the listeners here. Definitely check out the SNY-Verse saga. It's a very, very good book. About everything that has to do with leading up to Zack Snyder's Justice League being released. If you are interested at all in DC, Zack Snyder, or just films in general, a very well written book about the just extraordinary journey that the Snyder Cut went on to be released. So definitely check that out on Amazon. So thanks all for listening, and be sure to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends. And until then, hope you guys all have a great rest of your day, and always be on the lookout for another episode coming soon.